Why study Asian American actresses in history? I mean, how much did they really impact history that much? Now, first, I would like to ask, can you even name one? Can you name any Asian American actresses from early history? Unless you're a history whiz, probably not. I mean, we've all heard of Marilyn Monroe and Audrey Hepburn, but there really are not very well known Asian American actresses, and I am the type who like to study people and study things that aren't really thought of, that aren't really taught in mainstream history classes. The uncovered parts of history, you might say. And also, my mom is Korean, so I am half Asian, and I was intrigued by this history. And there's also something more important beyond me, and that is, I learned in politics class that whoever controls the channel of information really can affect a lot of things in politics, because those people who control the channels of information, they control the way public views things, the way the public perceives different issues. And so in cinematics, it obviously, the way they portrayed Asian American women, it really would affect the way Americans viewed Asians in general. And so I started my research with Anna May Wong, who was regarded as the first Asian American film star, and she was born in 1905. So she was born in California, and she fell in love with film at a very young age. She actually started acting as an extra in 1919 and had her first lead role in a movie version of Madame Butterfly called The Toll of the Sea, which is in 1922. So I actually watched this film. I found it on YouTube. And there was a couple interesting things that I noted. She was very beautiful, and they showed that. But she was very, very delicate, hence her name, the lotus flower. She's very naive, emotional, and so much, which is a huge contrast to her American lover. And of course that is just her role, but I'll come back to that later. But anyway, another thing I noticed was that because it is a silent film, all the script is typed out. And you can actually tell whether the Americans or the Chinese are speaking, because they wrote in a stereotypical accent, or grammatical errors. they wrote it into the typed out script, which I thought, in today's standards, if you did that in today, then that would be considered pretty offensive and racist. And of course, at the end of the film, if you don't know the story, she does not end up with the American, and this may seem like, oh, it's just part of the storyline, but it actually ends up becoming a very glaring part of her career. Throughout her career, she was very frustrated because multiracial marriages and love were not allowed to be shown on screen, and this actually limited her roles, because often white men were cast as the romantic lover, and so she was never allowed to marry them in the end of the films, and so they would just kill her off, or she wouldn't marry him. She would become the one that doesn't get the man, or she would just not receive the role at all, because they weren't allowed to show her with him. So in fact, yellow face was a thing partly for this very reason. So yellow face, of course, is where white women would change their appearance, or change the role altogether to appear like an Asian woman. And it took away many of her roles, and she ended up finding work in Europe because of how frustrated she was with America. And she even briefly started her own production company, but that eventually failed. She did return back to the United States and created Shanghai Express, and it's one of her most famous films. But in 1961, she died of a heart attack. Now, I did want to mention I actually chose to draw these actresses because I felt that it wouldn't do justice just to talk about them or just to write about them. So I wanted to add that, even though I'm not really an artist. Now, beyond Anime Wong, I really struggled to find famous and successful Asian American actresses in early Hollywood films. There simply weren't many, and I'm not sure if this is due to the fact that the Asian population was much smaller back then in America, or perhaps there was less incentive, or it was harder for them to break into the industry. I'm not really sure. But nevertheless, in 1961, which is the same year that Anna May Wong died, is when Flower Drum Song, a Hollywood musical with all Asian leads, comes out. And I found a couple actresses from there that I found particularly interesting. The first one being Mayoshi Umeki, and she was the first Asian actress to win an Oscar. She won Best Supporting Actress. And one thing that I found particularly interesting about her was that, she obviously had a very successful career, but her son said that she never liked speaking about her career when she settled down to become a wife and mother. And I think she's a classic example of an actress or any successful woman that perhaps struggles with this idea that, can I be in a career and be a mother at the same time? Am I being a bad mother, or am I missing out on opportunities if I choose to step down on my career? And I think for Mayoshi, I think she knew that she wanted to be a mother. I think that was truly what she wanted, and I do applaud her for that, for choosing that route. And I think it's still something that many women still struggle with to this day. So I thought that was interesting to note. Another woman I found very fascinating from Flower Drum Song was Reiko Sato, and she played Helen Chow in Flower Drum Song. Now, Reiko Sato was born in 1931 in Los Angeles. Note that date there, 1931. That would have been right in the middle of the Great Depression. And as a young girl, she was actually a part of the 127,000 Asian American citizens who were sent to internment camps in response to the panic during World War II, which I got according to ushistory.org. And after the war, she broke into the industry when she played Suki from Mother Didn't Tell Me in 1950, though she wasn't credited. From there, she became a successful actress on Broadway and in movies, especially in the area of dance. Now, when I took a second to just think about this, how she was able to leave those internment camps, and she was about 10 years old when she was in those internment camps, and able to break into the industry, I was left kind of shocked. Because although the conditions of the Japanese internment camps were not as bad as the conditions for the Jews in the Nazi camps, they were still very psychologically damaging. And the conditions were still bad. They were still held against their will, torn from their homes. And so for Reiko Sato to come away from that discrimination and into a country dominated by propaganda, and to be able to break into an industry that is predominantly white is quite incredible. And I think it is a powerful statement as to how you can rise above the discrimination of the time. So that is Reiko Sato. So I've mentioned 3 specific actresses who were in film, but I also wanted to take a step back and analyze the experience of these women overall. So when Asians were depicted, they were extremely limited in the roles. Joa Lee of the Wilfrid Laurier University writes and asserts that Hollywood created 2 archetypes. She says this forces them to be either soft and docile or hard and aggressive, without space for anything complex or human in the middle ground. The representation of East Asian women in popular media is harmful through its exaggerated portrayals of the China doll and Dragon Lady to further exoticize and dehumanize East Asian women, ultimately ensuring the dominance of the West. End quote. So as you can see here, I drew Anna May Wong as the Dragon Lady, and earlier I drew her with lotus flowers, and that's because I really wanted to illustrate those 2 very polar opposite roles that Anna May Wong would end up playing. And I also wanted to mention Joey Lee talked about how the China doll was often very hypersexualized as well. And I think that was a result of some history that many Asian women would be abducted into the sex industry. And so, that is what was portrayed in the media. That's what people knew about Asian women. And so it got transferred there. And I still think that it's present in society today. If you ever watch any anime or just in movies, often they are very hypersexualized. And I think that it can be a negative effect on women, and it certainly can be very dangerous too. And finally, I wanted to just talk a little bit about my own experience. Now, I'm not an actress, though I've done a few family home videos. I'm not really an actress, but I have grown up watching movies, and I have grown up watching films. And there's not a lot of Asian actresses out there. There's not. And if you do see them, they're like the sidekick nerd, or, the weirdo who can't really fit in. That's kind of what you see. And, some might argue that's not really important. Why does it matter? But if you grow up in a dominantly white community, which I did, you start to notice after a while that, oh, I don't look the same. I don't look like everybody else. And I think that there is something very, very powerful about watching Asian American actresses on the screen that are powerful and smart and beautiful. It kind of gives you a sense of pride about your own ethnicity, especially for people who maybe were bullied or picked on for being Asian. That's something important, to be proud of your own ethnicity. It's a part of your identity. It's a part of who you are. And so I do think that there is some value in representation. Now, there is quite a bit of controversy in, how much emphasis do we need to put on race? Should we really be pressuring Hollywood this much to have representation? That's up to debate. That is up to topic. But as long as we're having the discussion, I think that is a step forwards. That's a step moving forwards. And I also wanted to take a moment to quote somebody from Joy Luck Club, which is, I think, another all-Asian cast, and it came out in 1993. And this actress is also from The Good Doctor. That's Tamerlan Tamita, and she said, "It's a complicated and complex issue, but as long as the discussion is being carried forth, we have to understand there's a lot of anger. It's been a century of this practice of casting white people and people of color roles, so there's going to be a lot of pushback in seeing people of color demanding those kinds of opportunities and changes to participate in those roles that speak naturally to them." So obviously it's still a very current issue. And like I said before, who controls the narrative? They're going to change the way the public sees certain issues. And so it's all still very important and still really relevant. And I think in the meantime, we can really take the time to just appreciate these women that, aren't really known well. And they had very fascinating and interesting lives. And they helped to carve the path for any future Asian actresses that came after them. Thank you.